On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about the age-old topic of a scope of work. What goes into a scope of work, why are they so challenging to define, and what happens if you don't have a good one. All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 87. Pay me, sucker.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Sennheiser. For over 75 years, Sennheiser has been a leader in pro audio and is now offering a wide variety of touchless and traditional audio solutions for both corporate and educational campus-wide audio.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, programming, and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So today we're going to talk about a topic that I think is probably as old as the industry itself. And it isn't just limited to the being pertinent in this industry. It applies to any type of custom work that is done. And that's the idea of the value and the importance of a scope of work. And we last covered this topic way back in episode 4, which was in 2013. So hopefully you've been listening to us since then, and we can now refresh it. And thank you if you have been listening that long. So with me to discuss this are a couple of experts that I think will have a lot to share. And before we get to them, I'd like to say hi to Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa. How are you today, Rich?
I'm doing good, brother. Mellow West Coast greetings, boy. Pulling the Wayback Machine, 2013. Did I have hair then yet? I don't remember. So.
You and I have been doing this for a while, partner. So with us are two returning guests, and you'll know them both from A State of Control as well as other podcasts on the network. And first and foremost, I'd like to say hi to Bernard Morgan from ICS Plus. Welcome back, Bernard.
Hey, Steve. Great to be here, and thanks for having me. In 2013, you're making me feel old. Stop it. Yeah, you were around, and hopefully we had you on the show probably way back then too.
And last but not least, he's the host of Resi Week. And if you don't know Resi Week, you should. That's another AVNation podcast covering the residential side of the industry. He's Matt Scott from Omega Audio Video. Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm great, Steve. Thanks for having me. Hey, Uncle Richie. Good to see you, Bernard.
Well, the gang's all here. So as I mentioned in the top, this is a topic that I think comes up in so many conversations, so many projects, and it never gets old. And I'm sure everybody listening can easily relate to this. And when we talk about scope of work, it always has a lot of connotations and a lot of interpretations, and the challenges that are involved in both defining it as well as managing it. Rich, when we talk about scope of work, and I'm sure that you have tons of stories you can share, why is it still a struggle? Why are we still in a situation where this is a sensitive topic?
Because as much and as hard as we work at what we do and try to educate our other friends on projects, typically the end user, the person who ultimately the scope of work gets into, is still getting up to speed. And with the technology itself, because it is constantly changing and there are constant challenges that we have to meet, it's easy for us to forget, because we do this day in and day out, that the people that we're serving don't. And so we always have a uphill climb with the Hollywood ideal of how technology is supposed to work, right? And the concepts and, the high level concepts of, and rightfully so, of how people think that normal people would use a system and how a system should work for normal people. And we are constantly having to explain that this is a great theory, but the expectation and the budget and the timelines all have to come together. And so I keep referring to, we call it the decision triangle. There's 3 points to it, right? It's fast, cheap, easy. or cheap, reliable, easy. Any of those in the tree, and you get to pick 2 out of 3. And we spend our entire time trying to figure out which one of those 3 are they willing to throw out. And typically they don't want to throw any of them out. So we're having to spend all of our time saying, this is where the decisions come into play. And that's always it. You're going to be dealing with budgets, timelines, and expectations. And a scope of work is trying to de-technify what we do and hope somebody reads it. And the hard part is we can have them glance at it. There's no guarantee that they're actually going to spend the time to immerse themselves in it. But, it's ours. And at the same time, everybody's always calling our babies ugly. That's tough too, when we write these scope of works. But they have to be done. And that's the hard part, is that this is just going to be a given in the industry. Whenever you take a technical layer or experience and you have to break it down to layman's terms, unless there is a very valid economic reason for somebody to read what you wrote, you're constantly going to be trying to find different ways to get to that audience.
Bernard, kind of taking what Rich said a little bit further, and knowing that this is always kind of a laborious task and not really everyone's favorite part of a project, what are some ways that you have experienced that have worked in being able to define and convey that to a client, whoever that client may be?
Well, I think one of the biggest things we have to consider when we talk about scopes of work, especially in the technology space, is that the terminology constantly changes because the product offerings constantly change. And now we're, working on a box that is so network dependent versus in the past, maybe it wasn't as network dependent. So I think one of the challenges with the scope of work is keeping a document up to date that can be still relevant, that because it's going to change. Some of the nuts and bolts are going to change constantly. And I think the problem is trying to keep something like that up to date that matches the technology and the timing in which you have to also deliver it. It's a pretty hard proposition to do because it's always changing, because the technology is always changing, and because the technology is changing, the dependencies of that technology and what needs to be included in the scope changes. So from that standpoint, you're almost, as you're programming a system, you're programming the scope. In some aspects, it may take almost as much time to put together a very thorough scope as it would be to program the project. And then it's a business proposition of, I put 4 hours into doing the scope, it's going to take me 2 hours to do the project. Is that upside down? And then at that point there, it just kind of spirals out of control from there, I think. So, I think the industry as a large has to take a look at the picture and say, this is a problem because of the fact that we have to educate the clients. In order to educate the clients, it has to be a certain level of understanding from the ground up where that conversation starts.
I think you touch on a lot of things that I'm going to come back to. Matt, I'll start with one of them being Bernard talks about the effort that you have to put in up front versus doing the project. And especially when you're trying to also be the person who's trying to get a client's buy-in, what does that balance look like, or is there something that can be done to make that more effective for both parties?
I think that's really the big challenge is trying to find a balance between providing the clients with enough technical information that they understand what they're purchasing, what they're getting, while also ensuring that it's simplistic enough that the majority of clients can understand, again, what you're selling. And then the byproduct of that is you have to ensure that you can back up what you've sold. Because no matter what you tell a client, whether it's an education client, a house of worship client, SMB client, or a large corporate client, or even a residential client, they're going to read what's in your scope, but they're going to interpret that in their own manner. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you write it, no matter how many lawyers look over it, they're going to take that information, hopefully digest it, because we've all been in projects where no one read the scope at all. But they're hopefully going to digest it, and then they're going to relate that to their knowledge base and their understanding and their expectation. And you can say something as simple as, we're going to put a touch panel on the wall that you can press and dim the lights. And they're going to take that as, there's a touch panel on the wall that's going to dim the lights, start the movie, bring down the projector, turn on my computer, and bring me a Coke. Once you have, that confusion, then when it comes time to do that walkthrough, finish that project, your client's understanding or interpretation of your scope can be dramatically different from yours. And I think that is, at least in our business, that's always the fine line that we're walking. We're trying to understand the best way to get our message across in the scope, make sure it contains everything and that it's documented for any creep that happens, but also know that we've got to be able to back up why we did what we did and how we did it and how that lines up with the scope, no matter how that client interpreted that scope. And that always comes just back to the communication of that scope and going through that scope multiple times with that end user or with that client. And, you really have to trust that everyone is on the same page and that you've spent the time to build that scope properly to hopefully achieve that. And then know you're going to fail.
Well, so on that note,
I'm not cynical about it at all.
Rich, I think we've all kind of alluded to the fact that this is there's an effort involved here, and is it? I like to look at what we've done in the past and challenge what we do moving forward and say, what if we're running into a roadblock or difficulty, what are the alternatives? Can there be a scope development exercise? Is that can that become consulting for some clients where you take the time to really identify and define what they want, so that then when the project is actually implemented, there should be a lot less unknowns or variables?
That's what I've spent the past 30 years trying to do. Yeah, there's a business in it, absolutely. There's absolutely what do they say, riches and niches, and being able to do that. You should be doing that, first of all. I mean, if you've been in business long enough, and if that's not an offering that you're making, you're losing out for a variety of reasons. One, for the income, but also to make yourself better. So let's rewind real quick, because it's easy sometimes on our show when we get into the programming side of things to get into the nitty-gritty of the programming. But there's some very specific realities about scope of work. Whether you're the owner of a company or whether you're a programmer working for a company, if a scope of work is not developed, maintained, and built upon, you're not getting paid. Sooner or later, there's not enough money coming in, and you don't have a business or you don't have a job. That's just where this all starts. And it's not doom and gloom. It's just the reality. You got a job. And every project, right, everybody in this industry, you get a deposit. Maybe some are better at getting progress payments based upon milestones. But I don't know of any company who at the end doesn't have a completion number. Whereas I did what I said I was going to do, pay me, sucker. And where your business survives and thrives is at that last part. Anybody can get a deposit. I've made a career cleaning up after companies who only got their deposit. And so what needs to come in is nobody likes doing a scope of work. It is tough, right? But it makes you better. Because if you can't explain what you do, you've got a big problem, right? It's the education process, right? If you can't very simply explain, it's the 5-second, the 15-second elevator pitch, right? If you can't make that elevator pitch about what you do for a scope of work, the problem is you. The problem is not the client, right? Oh, they didn't understand. Oh, scope creep. All these things that we talk about. No, you didn't have a process to keep it in. As an example, we had a project right now that we were doing. I spent 6 months in the development phase. Phase 1, I spent 2 months doing what we call a forensic review, where we went in and, pretty much most of the people watching the show are too young to remember, but we did the Quincy MD, right? We did the autopsy, and we went in and looked and said, that's what got him, right? There's all these mysteries about what got him, and we went and we broke it open and we looked at all of the guts and said, that's what happened here. Based upon that forensic review and where things went wrong, here's the path on how we believe your things are going to go right. Interviewed, and this was a Resi project. Interviewed the clients, interviewed the team, spent time on the site, did all of the things that we were supposed to do. Wrote this beautiful narrative, right? The client didn't read it. But it doesn't matter if they read it or not. What it provides, and again, this is a business decision. What it provides is the ability for you to finish the job. Because at the very end, people have short memories and frustrations happen and timelines move and all of these things. So if your price goes up or down or stays the same, that scope of work, if nothing else, defines, I said what I would do, I did what I said, you need to pay me. Period. Everything else are the details that fill that. But that is what a scope of work is about. Whether you're an integrator, whether you're a programmer, whether you're selling ices, again, I said what I did what I said, pay me. Period. Without that document, it ain't happening. And it doesn't matter that it's a technology industry. You need to have it. Because again, if you don't, one job, oh, you kind of shrug your shoulders. Oh, we didn't get the last part of it. 2 jobs, oh, 6, 7 jobs, and you're not getting that last amount. That's the salary for a programmer. And all of a sudden, you get to walk up to the programmer and say, we didn't make enough money on these jobs. We can't keep you. Maybe we'll call you back on a project basis. It's not good for anybody. And so it's not even a fear tactic. It's just, as I constantly said, right? Be brutal with your weaknesses. Do the things that, somebody said the other day was that, do the things you hate by acting like you love it. And that is a hard thing to do. But do the things you hate. Nobody likes doing these scope of works. But do it with a deep love and just attack it. Because you do, guess what? You get the G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip come Christmas because you got paid on all your projects. You got every single dollar out of that project. And that's what we constantly have to remind ourselves, which is like, hey, you want to get paid? You want a Christmas bonus? You want all of these things that you're talking about if you're an employee or a project manager or you're the business owner? This is where it happens. In that scope of work. How well or how poorly you maintain it, and like you said, Steve, and grow and build a foundation from it and expand on it. Again, I'm coming in on 30 years. I'm still trying to find better ways to do it based upon the ways I did it horribly. And we can't be afraid of it. You can't. We tap dance around it. It's like this eggshell. Oh, we can't talk about the things that we're doing wrong. No. Be brutal about it. And if you do, you get the good stuff at the end.
Your scope can be your roadmap, right? And if you've got your scope written appropriately and amended properly, then everything you should be able to literally take your scope and throw it onto a Gantt chart. It's going to tell you everything you have to do and everything that got added to that job. To Richie's point, if it's there and it's documented, it doesn't matter if they don't read it as long as they signed it. Because then you can come back and go, boom, here's what we did. This is everything. It's people either, at least in my experience, people either overwrite them or they underwrite them. It's really hard to find that middle ground. But it literally should read, and again, you want to make it look pretty, but it should read like a job flow. It should show everything you're going to do. And then that way, you know if you've stepped outside the lines. You know if there's stuff that got overlooked. You know if there's stuff that's been additionally added. And then you can go in and just go check, 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 check. Yeah, here we go.
And I think the one thing we also need to do now that we didn't have to do 10 years ago is I call it project alignment, right? Because there's so many different industries and trades that we are dependent upon. Everyone is on a project these days. I think that needs to be a key component in this scope, because you'll get to a place that you just can't move forward because of this, and your scope needs to define. If I get to that point, we could go on pause, but then I have to do a partial bill or something. It has to explain, we get to a point that we just can't simply move forward. How do we handle that situation? And I think that's one of the details that has to be in the scope. Because if you don't have a room, you can't hang a projector. If you can't hang the projector because you don't have the room, I can't program it. So those type of things have to be somewhat accounted for in the scope, so everybody gets to, when that thing gets delayed, because today it will get delayed, what does that mean, and what is the mobilization to get back going again? And I think those are things that we need to make sure we include, because of the fact now that projects are so segmented and spread out.
There has to be and I use this phrase a lot, but you have to think like a lawyer. You really do. If you are a decision maker or a business owner, you've got to think like a lawyer. You have to write everything as if it's the legal document that it is. To Bernard's point, if you're not putting those stipulations in, you're gonna get burned on them, because not every client is going to do the, yeah, you're right, when you sit down and have that conversation of the electricians aren't done, so we can't finish. If you have that on paper, signed off on ahead of time, because it's easy, we can't finish the room if the construction is not to this point. That's a really simple part to throw in there. But when you don't think, I get harassed a lot, especially in the resi world, for it, because I'm a little litigious. I come from a family full of lawyers, if you didn't know. But I'm a little litigious, and I think like a lawyer. I think like everyone is out to get me. So I continually put everything in there on the hopes that I don't ever have to use it. But when you get that client where you did everything you were supposed to do, and they're balking on something, when you have that paper that says boom, and then they balk a little bit more, and then your lawyer calls and says, hey, we got documentation that says boom, and you signed it.
And I think what you guys are touching on too is important to clarify when we talk about the scope. We're talking about almost two parts, or and I'm sure that there's even more than two. One is what you want, what it is it that you are going to deliver in terms of this is what the product you're going to get, or this is the functionality, or this is what the end result looks like. But then also how do we do it, and what are the rules of that relationship. And Matt, I think it's important, and actually Bernard as well, to be able to have a conversation with a client about that, because nobody wants to be that police officer or have to go and get into a legal conversation. We all are trying to make this a win-win. It's just a matter of, as you mentioned, protecting yourself and also having some foundation for what it is that you put a number on and you're committing to.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I think also has to be said too when we're dealing with scopes, there's almost two sections, right? And I think the one section is the ability to share what is being done as a narrative as bullets. And therefore, I think so many times, when we produce a scope, and especially from, as programmers, we tend to get into the nuts and bolts because the nuts and bolts make a difference so widely in our industry. But being able to just basically have a brief outline, almost like a summary of what's going to be done, and then dig into the details, because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. And I think us as an industry are always so worried about this new piece can't do this, but this can do this. All that information just goes over the end user's head to a point that, can we simplify it to a point that let's do like a very basic outline, and very bulleted point, and then have everything else behind it to back it up, so that way we can ensure that everybody actually understands what they're looking at. Because I think a lot of times when you sit at the table and what went wrong or what's going wrong, it's a lack of understanding. Oh, you need this before you can do this? How many times does that happen? It's the communication aspect and making sure everybody actually understands what they're reading, because sometimes I read documents, I'm like, I have no idea what that means. I got to call the electrician. I don't know what this is, right? And I think that happens a lot because all of us are dealing with such technical things that are moving very fast, and the construction processes these days are just speeding up so much more that it takes the time to slow down and make sure we all are looking at the same thing and know what we're talking about.
I want to jump into, like I said, we kind of went into do this or, you go under and your business, you're going to be out on the street with a tin cup, banging it with a cane. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, there is the business side of things. But this is a programming show, right? This is about control systems programming. The first question sometimes when you're starting out, and I have to remind myself, if somebody says, okay, that's really great what you're telling us, but how do I do it? Right? How do I do it? It's like, I liken it to, kind of like the martial arts, is I can go ahead and work something through, and it's easy for me because I've been doing it for years and years and years, but I forgot that person doesn't even know how to throw a punch yet or how to kick yet. So I'm like way over here saying, this is what you should do. You should know this. But I forget that sometimes somebody's just saying, how do I start? Right? Where do you start with it? There's a couple of ways that we've found that have been successful for us in generating the scope of work from a control systems programming standpoint. We keep live demos on our systems here. And there's a reason. I have a Resi version. I have a commercial version for an executive boardroom. And then I have kind of like a huddle space, small presentation area version. And then I have a room combining version. Okay. And when I'm working with whoever it is who's going to be the decision maker along the line of defining the scope of work, we sit down and we go, here, I'm going to show you my iPad. This is how some of these things work. And you get that visual connection, right? Ultimately, no matter what we do with the nuts and the bolts and the scope of work, and like Matt was talking about, with the litigious undercurrent of the document, you still have to show somebody, hey, when you walk into the room, this is an iPad, but imagine just something on the wall that you touch. Same concept, okay? Just don't worry about the fact that it plugs in or wireless or wired or anything. But then when you walk in, here are some ways that it can be done. We take either a action-centric approach. What do you want to do? This. We take an environment-centric view. Do you want the lights on for it? And you create the first step, which is, do they even know how these things work? And if they don't know how they work, let's show them simply how other systems have worked. Now, once we've established, okay, and they go, oh, I want something like that, or, oh, no, that wouldn't work for us. And that's when you ask the questions, right? Is there going to be a primary user? Is there going to be a technical operator? Is this the executive boardroom that CEO comes in once a quarter, quarterly earnings call, and they control the room, right? Because you have some C-level executives where it's just like, this is their fiefdom, and they got to be able to control the Death Star, right? But that's where your scope of work is generated from, right? Oh, yeah, we like that. We don't like that. Oh, can you make the color shift? Yeah, we'll get to that. Those are all details. But does this make sense to you? Yeah, totally makes sense. If, your CEO came in, you know them well enough. I'm not going to meet them. Do you think this would be something that they, would make sense? Oh yeah, absolutely. Great. Because you start tucking those things away, right? Of the things you're going to check. Because this also helps you be a hero for whoever are the decision makers at this point. But now your scope of work internally on the team, you then create that framework, right? Touch panel page. Again, Bernard's real good about this. I know, Steve, you're real good about it too, is that we lay it out. We don't get down to the Pantone colors of the icon, but we know that that's in the notes somewhere for some client that we have to have an exact Pantone color. Okay, well, that's a big detail. But just the framework where a checkbox occurs. A checkbox occurs. So how do you build a scope of work? First off, if you haven't done one or you're trying to do it better, create framework pages, right? Block pages of it. I don't care if it's a screenshot. I don't care if you're drawing it by hand. But, on, off. These are the things that you can expect. Because once you establish that framework, those are the instructions for your code. Okay? If your UI is going to require certain things, then you need to make sure that you've already thought about it first, because then it's filling in the blanks. Also, it allows you, and Bernard was saying, which was the playing with the other guys and gals on the project. What if IT gets to get involved and we forgot about that? And say we've got a HIPAA requirement, or we've got an FTC requirement, or a banking requirement, or we've got governmental requirements about how we can actually be here. That gets pointed out early on at that point, right? You're not sitting there on site and going, oh my, now what, right? That's where you get the last of your project, your last payment on the project, that you were the hero because you thought all of those things through. And as you mature in the industry, you start to spot those things earlier and earlier. But in the beginning, draw your touch panels, because you're going to find out very quickly where you've painted yourself into a corner. Because once you draw that touch panel, you should be able to look at the decisions that come off of that. And once those decisions come off of that, what are the pieces that you need? And if you're saying, we need a set-top box, we need a video conferencing unit, we need a mic, and we need a combining system. Okay, who are the players in this? Electrician, who's providing those things? How is it coming in? And all of a sudden, it will build itself for you. So, kind of learn how to throw the punch first. Create your touch panels, create a framework. Not saying make it perfect, don't make it the end product, but start there. Because once that checkbox goes in of I like it, I don't, I like it, I don't, I like it, I don't, everything else fills in. And then that comes into what Matt was talking about. All the things that you need to do to cover yourself. Okay, well, I need this. And Bernard was saying, okay, great. I need to talk to the IT manager. Because based on what you're saying, we're doing video over IP, we're doing audio over IP, we've got all of these microphones all over the place, and I got to do these 3 things. This won't work unless that person over there talks to me. And that says it in the scope of work. This won't work unless that person talks to me. And then you get to the end of the project, and they're like, well, why doesn't it work? This didn't work because the person wouldn't talk to me. And there you go.
I don't even know how to follow that up, but that's great. I did want to touch on one thing before and thank you because everything there is just such an important thing for everybody to think about and remember. I just wanted to touch on one point in that our clients are changing these days. So we have a lot more educated clients and especially when we're serving technology managers, many of them are coming from the industry. How does that affect the notion of a scope of work, or is that making life easier or harder for us? Bernard, I'll let you.
It's a blessing and a curse, because one of my business partners says assumptions is the mother of all evils. You're assuming that the person who worked in the industry calls this the same thing you call it. So again, that's kind of that gray area that it needs to be somewhat defined. It's great that as the industry becomes more, as the industry continues to expand and people understand what we do, that's great. But at the same time, that opens the room for interpretation a lot. And I think just making sure, like Rich just said, making sure that we can establish what is the same thing mean, right? Are we talking the same language? Are we saying standard functionality? Here's one of my favorite terms. you'll get standard functionality. Well, my standard functionality is this. Your standard functionality is that. We have to take the time to define standard functionality. And the great thing is, like Rich said, if you have a sample or have a demo and say, this is standard functionality, then take that document and say, as reference to this as standard functionality. That helps cut that a lot easier than you had to put it in text, because that's very difficult to put in text. Picture's worth 1,000 words, and that right there defines standard functionality, which is where we get tripped up as an industry all the time. So having something to refer to that is functional, then say, hey, reference that in the scope, have it as an appendix, and bring that in. That helps keep this thing a readable document so multiple people can understand it. So the lawyers don't are the only people to understand it. Everyone can understand it. And I think that's where, as the industry progresses, we need to work and be champions of making sure when we develop scopes, they're readable by all parties and all parties can understand them.
Yeah, because keep in mind that just because you get a technology manager or an IT director who understands what we're talking about doesn't mean that their boss does as well, and doesn't mean that they know how to communicate what, we can communicate to them and they can communicate back, and that might not be a problem, but they may not be able to do that going up their chain. So if you don't write that scope properly so that, as Bernard said, everyone at every level who needs to be involved or who may get involved can understand that, you can still paint yourself into a corner, because you may have an IT manager who thought he had or that they had the authority to sign off on that, and they did, until something didn't work to what the C-suite personnel were expecting, and then it rolls downhill real fast. So you can't just assume. We see this in House of Worship all the time. You can't assume that your technical contact, who may be the person you're talking to almost exclusively, that they are able to also communicate that to their bosses. And if you can make that transition very simple for them, you're saving yourself potential for problems in the future.
And I think it's a tremendous upside too if you're able to do that. I mean, just think about it. If you're able to communicate that one document can go through multiple places, how many times did you get this document from these drawings from this person, this information from this person, and this information from another person, and then us as in the technology field that we're in, we have to glue that all together. It'd be great if someone could provide one document for us all to work off. And that's how we look like the hero from the technical side and from the administrative side in these projects, if we can have a document that bridges that gap on both sides of the fence.
I think it's a great place for us to stop, and it's nice to end this on a positive note. And with that, I'd like to thank my guests for being here today. And first I'll start with Bernard Morgan from ICS Plus. How can people find out more about you, get in touch, and learn more about ICS Plus?
The website's a great place to start at icsplusonline.com, and the plus has to be spelled out. Okay. You can't use a plus in URLs still. Rich, go fix that.
And next, Matt Scott from Omega Audio Video, and also the host of Resi Week. Thanks for being with us. It's been way too long. I hope that we'll see you back here soon.
Yeah, I'd love to come back anytime. You can find me on Twitter at Matt D. Scott or OmegaAudioVideo.com, or obviously on AVNation.tv.
And last but not least, Rich, any closing words? I think this was a powerful episode, and probably one where we could go back and look at the archives and say we had a lot of learning moments.
Yeah, again, I think it's you can always be better at what you do. And sometimes the way you get better at what you do is going back to the beginning. And my advice, if you are in the control systems programming industry, if you don't have demos that you can show live of what you do, why don't you? And because if you're doing this as you're living, you should be able to show people what you do at a moment's notice. And if that's something as a business you don't have as part of your tool, don't matter how pretty your binders are, don't matter how detailed your scope of works are, if you can't show what you do, that's a big part of getting you to the next level of where you want to be. Because again, it's like anything else, right? It's we do something really, really specific, and we do something really, really cool. And sometimes you just got to be able to go, hey, you want to see something cool, and have it, because you have these things in your hand. So the old days used to be, oh, it's too expensive to do things. We have the technology in our hands, because by then, taking it back to the beginning and being able to show what you do, it takes you to that next level of what you can achieve. And that's kind of the springboard I see for all of that. And so it's good stuff. I mean, this is what we do here is because we're trying desperately to whoever's listening to get them to that next level. Right. And it's as much as I love to hear myself talk, and Matt knows if I get a chance to hear myself talk, I'm going nuts. But, this is, you want the G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip. Well, listen to what we just said, and make it happen. But if you do want to listen to me or hear more about what I say on the interwebs, you can find us on our website, Fregosa Design. You can find me on Twitter at @rfregosa. Obviously, I hope the best place you can find me would be here at AVNation TV and our suite of shows with two of my best friends right here. Obviously, State of Control with my buddy Steve, and Matt, who has AV Week and occasionally lets me show up. But we also have our suite of shows on all the other verticals. That would be the best place. If you can support us, support our sponsors, that would make Uncle Richie the happiest.
And we shouldn't leave out Tim. So if we're going to have a group hug, we should have him involved too.
Amen.
Nah, you can leave Tim out. It's fine.
As Rich said, check out all of the shows on AVNation at avnation.tv. You will find a lot of great content there, and it's a great opportunity to not only know and keep up with what's going on in the industry, but also get to meet some great people and hear what others are saying and learn quite a bit. With that, please also leave us any comments, reviews, ratings. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know what we can do to continue to make this show relevant and hit the mark and keep our listeners listening. If you want to reach me, you could reach me at Steve Greenblatt on most social platforms, or my company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net. And with that, thanks for joining us. And this has been A State of Control.